Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Minua dofo, minua kramoni, minua Christoni, minua Ghana ni a wotie me. Say yɛdi nkɔmmɔ bebree wɔ video so atwa mu no. Na ɛnɛ de yɛduru so yɛbɛ discuss something that we call the theory of contingency, and to prove the existence of the creator. In the previous video, we were talking about the idea of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by giving us an introduction as to what the Muslim position is and what the Quran actually says about this subject. Before that, yɛsa kasa defa the rational thought and the rational thinking. Na meda wasi bi se wasa se umre na oba betie mbiem. Yesro tumfo Nyankopɔn se sɛnea wonya mmere na wotie otumfo Nyankopɔn asɛm na wohwɛ nimdeɛ sɛnea yɛbɛtumi ahwɛ sɛ ɛnokorɛ sɛ otumfo Nyankopɔn obi ne bɔ wiase anaasɛ Nyankopɔn wiase we ne da hɔ no nye obi ane bɔɔ. To Nyankopɔn onhyira bebree na wonya wo kɛseɛ deɛ wohwehwɛ otumfo Nyankopɔn ɔma wo nsanka. Na yɛdi nkɔmmɔ fa rational thought ho no, we came to conclusion say rational thought requires us to sense the reality. And then we also move on to the Quran, and the Quran also urges us to reflect on our environment and to think about and ponder about what we see around us, and which will lead us into the conclusion that obi wɔ hɔ ne bɔ wiase. This leads us to the idea of contingency. I have to say to you, say, sa video way a video be a one of the important ones. Because this is where we prove the existence of Allah without relying on even the Quran. And to use our thinking and logical ideas to be able to demonstrate that otumfo Nyankopɔn bi wɔ hɔ a ɔne bɔ wiase. When we talk about contingency, it is a very, very loaded concept. Na yɛbɛbɔ mmɔden sɛ yɛbɛbreaking baako kakra sɛdeɛ ɛbɛyɛ a wobɛnya nteaseɛ. Nti mesrɛ sɛ pɛ pen ne bi wɔdwenem sɛ wotie what is going on, because sɛ wotie this particular video na sɛ wote deɛ ɛkɔ so biara, I think say you've got a concept to prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this video is very, very important. So contingency. So when we talk about contingents, that things that exist are contingent beings, what we are saying is, yebisa ye ho say, ade atwa ye ho ahyia owiase nyinara no, enua, epo, stars, everything. We asking the question, when we say they are contingent, then we are asking the question that why do they exist in the first place? Why do they exist? Or what has caused them to exist? This is the question we're asking when we talk about contingency. Now, it is important that we spend a lot of time trying to explain this word contingency in deep. Now, and we will do this. Say, the fatuhu be brave, beba. The message of Benya abotre ya mame. Na mama fatuhu be brave, said the bayanti as any bit me a sippy. Nidi can yem funny say, Otina says all be video. And I who say across the screen, who say ball be actual news. a tennis ball just go across the screen. Now, what comes to your mind? What will come to your mind is the natural truth that what has caused this tennis ball to go across. Or, for example, you hear a knock at the door. All of a sudden, you are in a house, you hear a tap at the door. Now, what comes across your head? What comes into your mind? Naturally, you ask the question, why is the door knocking? And who is behind the door? What has caused the door to be knocking? Naturally, we ask that question. So, what is leading to these questions? There's two things that we notice here. That we notice a change. That in society, number two, we also realize in society abano enise ebasa. Okay? Say adia epuna ye epuna enoku ye no. Say adia wunim se epuna enoku a, you wouldn't be bothered about it. But epuna, it is not in its natural state to be knocking all the time unless something has caused it to knock. The same thing, the ball, the tennis ball that came across the screen. You notice that there is a change from A to B. And that change doesn't necessarily have to take place. So the tennis ball moving from a stationary point to a position where it is in motion, the tennis ball doesn't have to behave that way. So therefore, you naturally ask the question, what has caused it to happen? What has caused that to happen? So these are the two things that need to be clear in our mind. That one, there has been a change. And two, that change doesn't necessarily have to happen. Now, let's move on from here. And let's try to use a table, a wooden table. Now, in order for you to make a wooden table, obviously you need a wood. And when you have a wood, I want to ask a question. Does it mean that you necessarily have a table? No. Because you can have a wood and you might decide that you're going to use the wood to make a chair. Or you want to use the wood to make a wooden bed. So the wood can be used to make different possibilities, can be used to make different things. One of which is a wooden table. So what I'm trying to push across here is that the table doesn't have to exist. Although because you have a wood, one of the possibilities that you could use the wood to make is a table. But the table doesn't have to exist. Because you could use the wood to be able to make what? A chair. So you can see where I'm going with this. The table began to exist. And when something begins to exist, then we ask ourselves, where did it come from? Obviously, with respect to the wooden table, from the wood. And where did the wood also come from? Obviously, from the tree. From the tree. And we realize that the tree is also very limited. It also didn't come by itself. It also depends on something else. The tree depends on something else. And anything that depends on something else for its survival or for its existence, we say that it is dependent. We say that it is contingent. So the tree, it needs the soil in order for it to survive. The tree, it needs nutrients in order for it to survive. The tree, it needs water in order for it to survive. The tree, it needs sunlight to manufacture its food in order for it to survive. So the tree, we realize here that it is limited. It doesn't cause itself to exist. It has to depend on something else. And therefore, we say the tree is contingent. Now, we can then ask ourselves that the tree needs the sun. It needs the sunlight to be able to what? To exist. And therefore, the tree is weak. Then, the sun. What does the sun also depend on? The sun, we can see that the sun has got a particular size. It's also very limited. It depends on something else. In fact, scientists tell us that we got the sun from a situation where we have the fusion of hydrogen atoms, which generates itself energy under what we call the gravitational forces. This is where the sun comes about, through fusion of hydrogen atoms, exploding and generating energy under gravitational force and releasing heat and light, which forms the sun. So the sun itself comes from somewhere. It comes from the fusion of hydrogen atoms. And what caused these hydrogen atoms to be formulated? Then we can also go on and on. We can talk about the nebulous, which is the part of the universe where we have dust and heat merging together and exploding, which leads to the sun, to the formation of the sun. We can then move on to the next stage and we can talk about where does the nebulous also come from. Then we can probably talk about the Big Bang theory, the Big Bang idea. And we can go on and on. We can even ask another question. Where did the Big Bang come from? Then we can talk about quantum, what do you call it? Quantum level fusion, as the scientists put it. Then we can ask ourselves, from that stage, where do we go to? Then we can also talk about the membrane structures. And we can go on to the supernovas. And we can go on and on and on and on and on. But the point that we are trying to establish here is not a science. But the point we're trying to establish here is the fact that things depend on other things. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. And this is what we call contingency. This is what we call contingency. So when we come back to the example of the wooden table, we find that we have two situations. That the table is a possible being. It doesn't have to exist. It is one of the possibilities that we could use the tree to build. So it began to exist. The wooden table began to exist. Let me give you another example of a triangle. When I talk about a red triangle, you say triangle doesn't have to be red in order for it to exist. In fact, a triangle can be different colors. As long as you have three boundaries, as long as you have three sides of a shape joined together, we have a triangle. We have a triangle. Redness is not a quality of a triangle. So when we say that we have a red triangle, then the redness has been imposed on the triangle. In fact, the triangle could have been blue, it could have been green. So when we see that happen, then we say that redness is contingent. The triangle didn't have to be red. So, in brief, what are we trying to say here? What does this explanation tell us about the existence of God? What does it tell us about the existence of God? What we are saying here is that there are four possibilities concerning whatever exists in this world. Four possibilities. Now, the first thing is things around us, the tree, the sun, everything. Maybe they came out of nothing, by nothing, for no reason. This is one possible explanation. The anima ye can want some say train was ye in Narano. Say ya we are, say ye nuya, say a po. One possible explanation is say these things didn't come from anywhere. Number two, that there is an infinite regression, infinite regression. That the possibility we are talking about here is things began to exist and depending on each other, and it carries on. So, for example, we're talking about the example of the table. So the table came about because we had the wood, and the wood came about because we have a tree. Okay, and the tree came about because we have the sun. Okay, and the sun came about because we have hydrogen atoms. All right, and hydrogen atoms came about because we have nebulas. And nebulas came about because we have the Big Bang theory. And then we have the cell membranes, membrane structures. Membrane structures. Then we move on to quantum singularities. And then from quantum singularities, we move on to the idea of supernovas. And so on and so on and so on. So we realize that in order for us to be able to have the tree, we need a sun. In order for us to have the sun, then we need hydrogen atoms. So what we are saying, when you have infinite regression or infinite regression, then things never end. It continues on and on and on and on. That is a possibility. So we talk about the first possibility, that things came from nothing. The second possibility is that things came into existence and it depended on each other in an infinite, it never ends. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is something we call cyclical dependency. Cyclical dependency. That things came into existence in a cyclical format. In other words, a very good example is the process that we get rain. Okay. So, in order to have rain, then you need the clouds. In order to have clouds, then you need a collection of water that evaporates. And when the water evaporates, then it leads on to condensation, which is the clouds. And when you have condensation, then you have what? You have rain. Then through the rain, water evaporates, the water is collected, then we have evaporation, it goes back to what? The clouds or the condensation period. Then we move on to the rain. And that cycle goes on and on without ending. And we are saying here that this is a possibility, that things exist in a cyclical dependency. Finally, the final possibility is that things came into existence as a result of one causal, independent creator who caused all of these things to exist. So now let's begin to understand these four possibilities. Is it possible for things to come about out of nothing? The things that are dependent, that are weak, that have no reality by themselves, came to exist out of nothing. That is not possible. That is wrong. It's never going to happen. Things came out of nothing, because this go against all the axioms of science. Because science is about causality. So we cannot just say things came by themselves, out of nothing, by nothing, and for no reason. It doesn't make sense. Now let's move on to the second stage. So we say that's not possible. Let's move to the second stage, where we have infinite regression. That things continue to go on and on and on without ending. We said, no, this is not a possibility. This is not a possibility. Because a very typical example that I normally give is dominoes. If you stand a bunch of dominoes, now, in order for them to fall, then the first one need to fall and hit the second one, and then so on till the last one falls. Now, if the first one doesn't fall, then the rest wouldn't fall. So it is not possible that you have an infinite dominoes and nothing happens. In order for one of them to fall, the last one to fall, then the first one has to fall. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. So the fact that we exist means that something has caused us to exist. Now the third stage is a cyclical dependency. That is it possible that things have gone in circle? So we have in order for rain to happen, we have the clouds, for example. Then the clouds also lead us into the falling of the water. Then the water is collected and evaporates. Then we'll go on back to condensation and the process carry on. Is it possible that things happen to be in existence and follow this particular pattern? No, it's not possible. That is not also a possibility. Why do we say no, that it's not a possibility? It is not a possibility because if you look at it, before rain, there must be clouds. Before clouds, then water must evaporate before we get to the cloud stage. Then which one is causing which one? It's not possible. A very good example for you to understand is the chicken and egg idea. Which one came first? Kosia and akoko. Which one about first? Is it the egg? Because from the egg we get chicken. From the chicken we get the egg. So you move yourself into a cyclical dependency. So which one came first? You'll never be able to solve the problem unless you go outside the cycle and begin to ask yourself, what caused these things to exist? Excuse me. So that is the only way you could explain why things came into existence. So the cyclical dependency is not a possibility. So when people talk about the Big Bang theory, and then the idea that the universe keep expanding, and then it contracts into the super crunch theory, and then we go into quantum level singularities, and then it expands again, and then it contracts. We got ourselves a chicken and egg problem. In order for us to be able to explain this scenario, then we need something outside the cycle in order to be able to explain that. So this leads us into the last option, which is these things that we are talking about, the sun, the moon, the sea, all of these things that exist in the universe, including the universe itself, began to exist because they are limited, they are dependent, they are very weak, they depend on something for their survival, and therefore that thing that they depend on, the very source they depend on, which by its nature has to be independent. Otherwise, if it is also dependent, then it comes back to the chain. Which then means that we come back to the cyclical kind of scenario. And therefore, the only possibility is that we have an independent being from which everything began to exist. So when people ask, then who then created God? It doesn't make sense to ask that question, because for God to be able to, for God to be created by another being, then he comes back into the queue and joins the cycle, and therefore he ceases to be God. But because we exist and things exist, then we might have a situation where we have a creator who is unlimited and from whom everything else depends. Otherwise, we have an infinite regression. Things keep going and going and going and going. Another example that I gave in one of the videos is the fact that we all believe that we have great grandmothers. So you have your mother, your mother had a mother, and your mother had that, your grandmother also had a mother, and it carries on. Do you think this chain of motherhood will have to carry on till indefinitely? No, that's not going to happen. There must be a point where it has to stop. If it doesn't stop, then you cannot exist. And the source is what we call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it to exist. And Allah doesn't have to depend on anything. By logic, Allah doesn't have to depend on anything, and He has to be very unlimited. Otherwise, He will not be able to cause anything to exist. He become a created being, because if he's a created being and not a creator, then he also depend on something else. Which then mean that your great-great-grandmother wouldn't have to exist, and you even wouldn't exist. And the fact that you exist means something caused all of this change to happen, and that thing must be independent. And that is why we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He exists. So the point, to sum up, what we are saying here is that when we look at things around us, we see two things, that they change. And not only that they change, that they don't have to be like that. So the tennis ball, when it came across the screen, there was a change, but it doesn't have to. And when that happens, we ask the question, what caused that to happen? And then when we look at the idea of the wooden table, then we realize that the wooden table didn't cause itself to exist. In order to have the wooden table, you needed a wood, which came from the tree. So the wooden table was a possibility. So we say it is a contingent being. It didn't have to exist, but it came to exist. So it began to exist. Where did it come from? From the tree. And the tree came into existence with a support from what? The sunlight. And where did the sunlight came from? It came from the fusion of hydrogen atoms. And where did the hydrogen atoms come from? From nebulas. And so on and so on and so forth. So we realize that everything that exists is dependent on something else. And we say they are contingent. And we realize these cannot go on and on and on forever. So we don't have something we call the idea of infinite regression is wrong. The idea that things came out of nothing, we have shown that that is also wrong. Things that are weak and dependent cannot exist by themselves. They have to depend on something else. Because otherwise, when people talk about the greatest magic and the greatest superstition, in fact, to believe that things came from nothing is the worst scenario that you can have. The probability of that happening is very, 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 very infinitesimal. Very, very small. In fact, it cannot happen. That things that are weak and dependent came out of nothing. We cannot also have infinite regression. That things carry on in a chain of events. Like the table, to the tree, to the sun, to the hydrogen fusion and so on. That cannot carry on forever. Can we also have a cyclical kind of dependency? We've shown that will never happen. The chicken and egg example is a very good one. Which one came first? Is it the chicken or the egg? Or is it the egg first or the chicken? If you try to solve the problem, where do you go from there? Unless you come out of that particular condition and ask yourself, what caused these two things to exist? then you have a solution. Then you can make progress. So cyclical dependency is not an option. So we are left with the only option, which is that there is an independent, necessary being. In fact, that's the word. Independent, necessary being that is eternal, that caused everything else to exist. So I hope that this helps you in trying to establish in your mind the idea of a creator that existed, that will continue to exist, and from whom everything came to exist. And his name is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He created you, he created me, and created everything that exists in this dunya. And one day he will destroy this, as he says. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله